Welcome to another episode of The Artsy Raven, a show about writing and publishing with your host, J.F. Garrard.
Hello, welcome to another episode of the Artsy Raven. Today I have two special guests. Gregory James Light was born in 1951 in Canada. He lived abroad for 42 years in Paris, London, and Chicago before his recent return to Toronto. He is a writer, performance artist, and professor. In addition to 4 academic books and 70-plus academic papers, he has published 4 works of poetry and theater. His plays and performance pieces have been produced and performed in France, the UK, Switzerland, and Canada. He holds 2 passports and almost speaks 2 languages. He divides his time between Toronto and an island in the Canadian Shield. Rafael Sinclair Madavi was born in How do you say your last name? Madavi? Madavi, okay.
That's right.
Rafael Sinclair Madavi was born in 1946 in Mexico of an American mother and an Iranian father. He spent his youth in Mallorca, where he was homeschooled by his parents until the age of 10. He then attended European schools and completed his university studies in the U.S. As a writer, he has written 6 novels published by Kindle Direct Publishing, and as a painter, he has numerous solo shows worldwide. He holds multiple passports and speaks several languages. He divides his time between France and an island in Greece. For more information, I'll be posting their websites down below in the links of the podcast. So welcome, Gregory and Rafael.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, both of you have done so much. Maybe can we take a step back and let's talk about how you first published, or what was the first thing you ever published or written?
You want to start?
Yeah. The first thing I ever published was my memoir of my youth with KDP Publishing, and that was in 2007. Sorry. And what happened was that I began writing in college poetry and essays and plays, but my painting career took off earlier, so I kept on writing, but sort of on the side. And in my late 60s and early 70s, I decided to go back to my writing because I was sort of fed up with the art world.
Fed up with the art world? Okay.
Let me say one thing though. I mean, I have a right to bitch because I've had a modicum of success in the art world.
Yeah. What kind of things were you painting?
I was painting usually large pieces. In New York, they were mainly gray landscapes. And then in the 70s and 80s, they were abstract. And then they became more figurative. And now they're very figurative.
Oh, very interesting. Very interesting. Well, Gregory, how about you? You've written quite a bit, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I can remember publishing was through the cooperative press. It was a book of poems called Tundra in Paris, quite a long while ago, through a cooperative press that we all had set up, a whole lot of artists and writers and people back in 1976, 77, 77, I think. And then I was mainly working, that poetry turned into more performance and theater. And I began producing my plays. The plays had a moderate success, won a Fringe First Award in Edinburgh, which is the largest festival of theater in the world. And Playwrights Canada, which was a publisher in Canada, published 2 of my plays back then. And it took off from then. Then eventually I also got into academic life and published books with Bloomsbury and Sage and Harvard University Press, as well as about 70+ journal articles and chapters in books.
So these are all very different forms of writing. I mean, is there one you
And
particularly
journalism.
enjoy? Yeah, you enjoy all of them. Yeah.
Yeah. For me, anyway, writing. Yeah, it's just writing is what I do. And I really enjoyed. I mean, looking at the different forms and formats, it was just fun to try them out and express what I felt and wanted to do within them. In some ways, it was like I mean, Rafael and I worked together really closely from an early age, and watching him doing painting. He would try different experiments. We experimented with forms, and he does sculpture as well as painting. So it began to learn that we weren't confined by any particular genre. Genres have now, of course, with the advent of technology, gone even further. There's all kinds of different genres as well as different forms of writing.
So, Rafael, do you want to talk a little bit about how you met Gregory?
Well, one of the things, yes, I was a bartender in Pigalle and at Leroy's, and Greg walked in with some girlfriends, and we hit it off right away.
Girlfriends, more than one, eh?
Yeah. That night it was quite amazing.
One was a friend of his, right?
And what was amazing from the very beginning, that we had an amazing sort of rapport, not only about writing and plays and painting, but about a lot of other things, about philosophy, about death, about time passing, about philosophers. And our likes and dislikes were very similar, and the lacunae that I had about plays, he filled, and his blind spots with art, I filled. So in a way, we taught each other a lot of things, and we worked the book covers and the plays and the sets. He would advise and I would advise. It was an amazing self-confidence. It was freedom and creativity and trust in the other.
Now, you wrote more than one book, though. So after your memoir, what else did you write?
I've been writing poetry since I was in college, and I kept the poetry until 2007, and then I went through it all, and out of the hundreds of poems that I'd written, I kept only 50. And those I self-published first, and then with KDP, and then I began writing the novels. And so it was they used to be in the 60s and 70s and 80s, even, or in the 70s, this idiotic phrase, master of none, jack of all trades, and like as if you paint, you paint. You can't write and poetry or novels. And that's baloney. I mean, look at Michelangelo. He wrote poetry. He did architecture. He did painting. Artists, look at Henry Miller. He did wonderful watercolors and so on. And what Paris allowed us to do, and also my association with Greg, is to try a lot of things.
Yeah, I've had this conversation with some friends before, like Leonardo. Like, why are they painting themselves into a category? They do tons of things.
Exactly.
Now, yeah, people seem more siloed than before. It's almost more closed-minded.
Yeah, absolutely.
It may be the publishing world is siloing us in some ways. It's hard to know specifically, but absolutely. I mean, we were just, experimenting with expression, and however that expression came out, and that wouldn't be just from ourselves, but our collaborations. We would suddenly collaborate and come up with some new idea or whatever that we would try. And I mean, I didn't know I was doing performance art. I mean, when it comes to your classical sense of art, I mean, my two of my brothers they had an eye. I could mainly draw stickmen. I couldn't really get past that. But I eventually had a gallery in Paris for my art performance. I mean, Raphael had a number of galleries in Paris, but I mean, it was insane in some ways, but incredibly invigorating and enthralling.
It was lovely. It was incredible.
Whatever we wanted to do.
Incredible. It was. It's hard to explain the freedom we felt and the confidence, and somehow things would work out, and they did. They did. We were poor, very poor, but they worked out. Yeah. It was an amazing 2 decades.
So what are some of the challenges you remember? Do you remember? Legally,
it was a big deal. I mean, we were under the radar.
Illegal immigrants.
And Leroy said, "Don't worry." And the cops didn't care. When Interpol hold me in for as a because I've been a draft dodger, they showed me my dossier, which is huge, full of carbon copies, and they said, "Fine, we found you. We told the American Army, but you've broken no rules in France. You're free to go." They knew very well that I had no papers, but they didn't care. It was great. I mean, it was no problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, no way. And you too. I mean, when you were sick, they didn't ask for your credit cards and for your,
No, I mean, well, and we talk about this in the book, in the memoir that we've written together about these times. I mean, it was amazing. I didn't even think about, visas at all. We just, you went to the border, you showed your passport. At one point, they began to think, you've been in here quite a few times. Where do you live in Europe? And I went, oh, I don't live in anywhere, but I'm just traveling around. I'm going to Barcelona. I'm going, okay, 6 more months. 6 more months.
And when they did check up on us in your apartment, they walked up 5 flights of stairs, and we were having a party with the Haynes crowd, and they lumbered up the stairs, knocked on the door. The door was open, actually, and they said, "We've received complaints about the noise and the music," and you offered them a glass of wine, right? And the other one, and then before you knew it, they polished off a bottle, and they said, "Okay, thank you very much. We'll leave now." And somebody said, "I'll be getting a fine." And they said, "Oh, no, it's fine. Don't worry."
Well, he did pull out a book, a ticket, and began writing me a ticket.
Oh, yeah.
He finished, and I said, doucement, which is softly, je suis un poète. I don't have a lot of money, right? And he went, the first one's for 0 francs. But if I have to come back again, I mean, there were like 6 of them, right? But they were our age. They were nice. We were fortunate. I mean, it was a different time, a different era.
We were so lucky, so lucky.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
And
Yeah, it is a different time now. I mean, just crossing the border. Oh, so much quicker.
Yeah, now I go back and I'm thinking, well, I have a British passport as well, but now that won't work in Europe when we go back. So, I mean, we're fine. I mean, our passports will work and everything else.
And something else, which in retrospect, I'm just at the fact, Greg and I had read a lot. We were often exchanging points of views of authors that we liked. And that was a very invigorating experience. He would say, "Oh, read this book." And I would say, "Oh, have you heard about this book?" And it was a very enriching book-based exchange very often.
Yeah. Well, there was no phones or
and
no internet.
Yeah.
Everything was paper. And we were fortunate. There were a number of other artists and writers and dancers that and musicians that we came in.
Yeah, amazing.
We would collaborate with them. But we tended to collaborate with each other the most. And for many years, we said, we got to write this up. We got to write this 4 years up. That's
40 years. We said, we got to write this. We got to write about this.
We never got around to it.
Oh gosh, I have a friend that's like that. We should write something. We should write something. But yeah, it's been over 10 years.
COVID came along and gave us an opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, it was a wake-up call,
So what is your favorite part of creating something? Is it like the end product? Do you like having something concrete, a painting, a book, or is it the process that you're doing together?
I'm laughing because we used to talk about this. We'd be in the middle of something and take a lot of time and everything else, and it looked chaotic and everything else. And then we get to the end and it was beginning to shape, and we go, okay, now we're getting to the result work. The time we're putting now is making it look like a finished product, right? But the craziness of doing it was probably my favorite, although it's nice to have a finished product.
And we took nothing for granted. Nothing was sacrosanct.
Yeah.
As you'll see in the book when you read it,
Yeah, nothing was,
So do you have any lessons learned for any writers or artists that you think you could share other than giving people, wine?
Well, yeah, I do. Yes, I think that the main thing you need is luck. I'm the first to admit that it's all been luck. I know too many painters and writers who are better than I am and haven't gone to square one. Luck is what it takes. And then if you have a thick skin and are stubborn and love what you do and can deal with the poverty, it wasn't, I mean, we could eat, but no luxuries.
Mhm.
You got to be stubborn and you got to be lucky.
We could eat because we worked at a restaurant.
At Haynes, yeah.
So work in a restaurant. Yes.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, absolutely, luck is critical to it. I mean, determination is important, and
Yeah.
it's linked to luck, because I always say if you don't throw the dice, you're not going to get a double six.
Yeah.
But the more times you throw it, you give an opportunity for luck to come in. So you just have to keep at it and keep at it. And if you're lucky, but not everybody's lucky, and
Yeah.
it can be tough. Nowadays, I think it's great that the opportunities for publishing are there.
Fantastic.
You know, I mean, it means people can get their work out past themselves almost immediately. Rafael and I used to have this conversation. He would say, "Oh, you're so fortunate," and I said, "Why?" He said, "You're a writer. You know, all you need is a piece of paper and a pen." Eventually, I got a little typewriter. And he said, "I need to get canvases and paints. It costs money. It'll cost a lot more money." And I would say to him, "Yeah, but at the end of the day, you have a finished product. I just have some words on a piece of paper." Now writers can have a finished product, and I implore them to put down the best finished product they can, to rewrite it and go over it and things like that. But now they can have it instantly by putting it online.
It's fantastic. And one thing, I mean, you know, the perseverance and stubbornness and really going after it. I mean, in a way, it's come true for us because an agent called us up.
Oh.
And the Dishwasher Dialogues are going to be at the Frankfurt Book Fair.
Oh, wow. Congratulations. Yeah, I'm thinking there aren't too many book fairs now. Usually I've been to the one in New York, but they shut it down.
No, it's amazing.
I
But
guess there are a number, but
you saw the Kirkus Review and bang.
yeah.
Oh, cool.
So
Okay.
yeah, so that's just happened in the last month or so.
Yeah.
That's
luck plays a main role. And you know, being determined and going is something that you're born with. I mean, you can't learn to be lazy, or you can't learn to have good eyesight or perfect pitch.
And this is where we disagree, as we often did in our conversations, where we'd be almost shouting at each other. And people would go, "What are you guys fighting about?" We're not fighting. We're just having a conversation. Somebody else, it sounded crazy. I mean, I think you can learn to be determined. I mean, with a little luck, if you push yourself. I mean, nurture nature. How much is it of it?
And you've learned how to write different things. I mean, some people are so focused on one thing. You don't have to be. You can be diverse.
Yeah.
Right. And some people, it's great. They can really hyper focus on a particular form and format and become really good at that form and format, which is great.
I mean, I look at painting as a métier, like a shoemaker. I mean, when Da Vinci paints the Mona Lisa, he's not, quote, expressing himself. He's not doing some kind of therapy. He's doing a job and getting very well paid for it. And I think that most of what I do, at least, whether it be painting or sculpture or writing, it's a craft. I'm doing a craft. The whole art thing about eternity and transcendent life afterwards, it does not believe in it.
I think a lot of people are more focused on the fame these days, especially with the YouTuber. Oh my gosh, I have a child that tells me they want to be a YouTuber. I'm like, no, where are you gonna do YouTube?
Fame is an interesting thing, or audience size. I think of what is a good audience? What is a respectable audience size? And of course, audience sizes can come. They're not connected to the quality of the work. And the quality of the work, as Rafael said, is normally constructed. It's constructed to a large degree, not entirely, by our societies and what's acceptable and what isn't. and over the years, writing has been, I mean, when it started out, there's an interesting writer who talks about, I mean, he's long dead now, but he talked about the paradox of 600 years of English literature and only 200 years of English literacy. In other words, we had English literature for 600 years, but only 200 years where people could read it. Because, I mean, obviously what he's meaning is that the vast majority of people couldn't read. It was a literature that we now, you know, create this large canon about and talk, but it was only for the wealthy, primarily men, gentlemen, who had learned to read. Over the years, it slowly became, you know, I mean, I'm talking about the English world, but I'm sure it happened in the other worlds too. It slowly became to include other types of writers, you know, diverse parts of writers. But for a long while, writers were, you know, really marginalized or not allowed in, which is why.
Or in special cliques. They were not like musicians who were at the court of so and so. It's the Gutenberg press and the computer, I mean, have made it so much more democratic.
Yeah.
And I think
our society has to allow that to happen. Allow voices.
Yeah.
Do you guys think there's a decline now with all the streaming stuff that people are not reading as much? Like even my child, like I'm pushing them to read, but they're like, "Oh, I want to play my game on the iPad." Like there's so many other distractions. It's really a different.
Well, I think
very
in
different.
some ways it's 600 years of literature, 200 years of literacy, and about 25 years of literati. Everybody is a writer.
Yeah.
You know, and
Yeah.
and the numbers of the literati, I use that as a word for writer, has, you know, gone skyrocketing up, and less people are reading as, I mean, possibly more. They're more interested in writing than reading.
Yeah,
I don't know.
English professor that was saying, yeah, the students don't want to read what they are assigned; they just want to write. So.
Yeah.
But also there's this thing about students not wanting, and understandably so, sometimes to be hurt by what they read because of many issues. I don't have enough information, and few people do. I think about is youth today reading more or less. I don't believe in the good old days. I mean, I think that youngsters read, but we're just told about the ones who don't. You know, my grandkids read a mile a minute, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think people are reading. Maybe we just take it for granted that, you know, and people are reading their phones all the time.
All the time. Yeah.
That's all words. It's all words. Words have only become more important, as well as images.
Yeah.
So it's great. It may be that the ratio of reading to writing has changed, but that's good too. That means more people are writing, more, you know, there are more voices, more expressions. It's the same with images, people putting their paintings online too.
Oh, yes.
That's another wonderful thing.
And photography is just has, you know, it's amazing. And music, no, I think it's tempting to say the good old days people were somehow reading more. I'm not sure I believe that. I think that there's so many wonderful opportunities today.
Yeah.
And with your children, Gerard, I think you have to trust them. You know, they're going to pick up things that they love to do, and they'll do them. You know.
Yeah.
Well, he's written a few books I've published. They're picture books, though, about marbles.
That's
he is the hardest writer I've ever worked with, who refuses to edit anything. But yeah, we'll keep it on track. Well, you know, I still buy him books, and you know, hopefully he'll, you know, keep reading.
I mean,
I'm sure
I
he's reading something.
I want to say one last thing.
Okay.
I remember my mother would get galleys from her novel, right, from New York, when they were in Mallorca. And the galleys were reams and reams of yellow paper. And she and my father would spend weeks editing. Now, thank God, it doesn't exist. So it leaves more time for actually being creative in your writing. Yeah. And not spending so much time correcting galleys, and then those being recorrected and re-edited by the editor. So it gives you more time.
So, Gregory and Rafael, do you have any final thoughts for our conversation you want to share before we go into the reading that you're about to do?
I guess I don't know whether you're going to say anything about what we're reading. We talked a lot about our Paris time together, and that's what the book is about. So, I mean, that's wonderful. About writing and publishing, we only touched on it briefly, the question of audience and fame, because I think a lot of people write for those reasons only, and that's understandable. And it's something you have to work through. I mean, because not everybody, I mean, there's just too many writers and readers out there. Not everybody's going to be famous, and not everybody's going to make a huge amount of money from it. And I'm hoping that most writers aren't doing it only for that. Because, you know, that is a lifetime of possible misery. And we also know that, you know, the kinds of things that you know, publishers are publishing in large numbers now are usually associated with celebrity of some sort. Not always. I mean, there are breakthrough writers, but they're fairly few. But I mean, I guess going back to the same thing, just work at it. If you enjoy it, work at it, continue it. It's a fun thing to do, as we've found later in life, even renewing this project we're doing. It's a fun process to go through. As a way of living in any case. So I guess those are my final comments on that.
Rafael?
Well, this may surprise you, but looking back on my life, and I'm not bipolar, okay? I
Okay.
want to say, but I think the intensity of creating and getting a show or a play put on, or is that the elation is very intense. And so you have the creative things aside with writing and painting. And then you have also other things, friends who die, love affairs that don't work out. I mean, we're not always, this idea of being, you know, why are you unhappy? Why are you depressed? Well, that's bloody normal. You're not going to be always, oh, you know, the happy painter, or it's normal to think about death often and to be elated and then say, oh, and get lost and depressed and maybe drink too much for a couple of months. That's part of the game. I mean, otherwise, don't get into the creative racket, because it's intense, very.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not a soft ride. No, it's not at all. No.
I should mention one thing too.
Our dialogues.
At the back of it, we're not writing for ourselves only. I mean, part of that process is you have some kind of readership. You have an idea. It doesn't have to be a huge readership. You hope it's going to be successful, but you are writing for something. You are trying to connect in a way, but you're connecting your own passions, your own
absolutely
demons, or whatever one wants to do. They're not just to be played around in your own head with. I mean, you are trying to connect and express them to somebody.
It's not a personal therapy to kind of get you out of your misery, your problems. But the one thing people forget is that language is not private.
Yeah.
If it's a private language, means you're nuts. So that's what it means.
Yeah.
If you sit in the corner and babble away and say, "Oh, I'm writing a great novel," nobody gives a shit, because nobody understands it. So the idea of a language being common and public is also very important. It's, as you say, Greg, you're writing for people who have a common bond, which is language.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's very important. For me, it's very important. So being impersonal sometimes is a big advantage.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Okay. Now, do you want to tell me a little bit about what you're about to read, and then you can read?
Right. Well, we're going to read the first chapter. They're all fairly small chapters.
Okay.
I mean, we're not going to read the preface explains how we came about it, and we can probably talk about that after 40 years and talking about it. COVID came along, and we started writing. And one of us, I think you, we said, let's start it. You write something, I'll respond, you respond, and this sort of dialogue, a form of a dialogue came up. It was
I wrote you a letter saying, just start with these things: Paris, money, women, booze, drugs, painting, art. Let's
there were
start.
other things. Yeah, we made a list of the kind of events that we remembered because we were remembering. We also quote Proust, the great writer of Remembrance of Things Lost, saying, remember those things that you've got it written.
Things that are remembered are not often remembered the way they were really.
Yeah. So I mean, we try to be honest to what and we brought up memories in ourselves as we continued writing it. It was a great experience, and then we went through a period of and we edited it together. But we picked up, at least 4 years of. I was there for 4 years. Rafael was there for longer. But those 4 years where we overlapped, before you got your permanent papers, before we became the illegal years, we could have called the book that too.
That's a good title, the illegal years.
We eventually wrote it all up, and it really came really well.
Yeah.
Okay, so who's starting?
Raphael's going to start
Okay.
with because it's in our two voices, and we'll start. The first chapter is called Le Patron de Chez Haynes.
I left Manhattan because I missed Europe. I was a U.S. citizen then, Greg, and still am, but have since acquired a few more passports, 3 more to be exact. I feel safer that way now. No country is going to fuck with me in the name of patriotism. I alone will decide for what and whom I'm willing to die. I flew to Paris because I had been there in the late 60s. I had fled the U.S. to avoid the draft and being sent to Vietnam. By this time, in late 1975, I had been amnestied, and I stayed with friends in the Latin Quarter. There was a young woman also staying there who told me there might be a job opening at a place called Chez Haynes, up in Pigalle, off the Rue des Martyrs. The restaurant was a legendary hangout, owned and run by Leroy Haynes, himself a legendary African-American, one of the first in U.S. Army intelligence who had fought at Guadalcanal in the Pacific. Later, stationed in Berlin, Leroy learned about the upcoming U.S. Army deployment to Korea and resigned his commission. He went to Paris with his friend Don and started cooking and selling Southern honey fried chicken from a pushcart in the streets of Pigalle.
My road to Chez Haynes restaurant and to Leroy was the same road that led to my first meeting you, Raphael, February 1976. For me, that road started on a stretched DC-8 from New York to Luxembourg, Air Icelandic, a return ticket to Europe for $190. I never used the return portion. On the plane, I met Harry, who was sitting in the seat next to me. He was even younger than me, and I was only 24. But he had a cousin, Wendy, in Paris. He gave me her address and said he'd be there soon. With the best of intentions, we said we'd get in touch when he got to Paris, but I lost his cousin's address on the train. As fate would have it, I bumped into him a week or so later on the Boulevard Saint-Germain, around the corner from a cheap hotel I'd booked into on Rue Saint-André-des-Arts in the Latin Quarter. He was with Wendy. They were going up north to an American soul food restaurant where she worked as a waitress. So I tagged along. And voila, Leroy, you, and what would become a 4-year adventure.
I never found out why, but Leroy knew a lot of people. He knew the local cops, gave them free meals and free booze once in a while. Sometimes he made out bogus restaurant bills for them so they could make a bit extra on the side by getting reimbursed for meals they never had. Leroy also knew French film stars like Jean-Paul Belmondo. The mayor of Paris, Jacques Chirac, was also a buddy of Leroy's. Chirac often gave his press conferences at Chez Haynes. And then there were the shady characters from the racetracks too. They dropped by and gave Leroy hot tips on the hot horses. Flower sellers came by as well. They never declared their income, but they informed the police who was where and when in the restaurants in Pigalle at night. So the cops left the flower sellers alone. One of them was a young Sicilian named Liliana. I asked her out when she came by one evening. The next day, 3 heavyset dudes came in and asked me if I was planning to marry their sister Liliana. I said, no, then stay away and keep your hands off her or else we'll be back. I said, bien sûr, pas de problème. That's the way it was. Leroy didn't give a shit if his staff was legal or had residence papers or work permits. Over the years, I've come to suspect that from his Army intelligence days, Leroy had built a formidable network of acquaintances, from the U.S. Embassy down to the Parisian cops on the beat.
And thank God for that. I don't know how many of his friends and connections in the Parisian political and cultural hierarchy looked the other way, or if that was just the way it was, but it saved me from the imminent threat of hunger tapping me on the shoulder. I needed that job. Work permits never crossed my mind for the first 2 years I lived in Paris. To tell you the truth, they were far above my pay grade, which admittedly was non-existent. I repeat, I needed that job. I could pay the rent with that job and begin to breathe, or at least not choke. When I began the first day a week as a dishwasher, I was over the moon. Actually, I was over a large industrial tin sink with sludgy brown water dotted by bits of half-chewed lettuce floating on top. Finally, a job that put real coin in my hand and food in my belly. It was a job I could almost boast about, a job I could take to Orwell, look him in the eye and not blink. Who was I to question how the norms of Leroy's business worked? He had an arrangement with the local police, so it followed we had an arrangement with them too, although none of us mentioned it. Leroy looked after them, so they looked after him and his staff. The age-old circle of life on the street. Over the years, the police checked on the restaurant several times. They would usually drop in early just after 5 p.m., but well before we opened at 7 p.m. They would have to be blind not to see that we were all foreigners whose mastery of the Gallic language was pitiful at best. I would serve them a pastis or a glass of wine or a bottle of Heineken, depending on taste, while one of the waitresses hurried up the street to let Leroy know that his friends were visiting. Sometimes the cops told us not to bother Leroy. They knew he might still be sleeping off a late night. We would chat a few minutes and they would leave. Never once did they ask us for identification or question our right to work there. If Leroy hired us, it was okay by them.
Leroy employed young people as dishwashers, waitresses, bartenders, who were also writers, poets, photographers, painters, dancers. He was generous and warm-hearted, one of those rare people who somehow hadn't managed to forget what it meant to be young. In Paris, those were years without credit cards. Copy machines were rare. Even telephones were hard to come by. Chez Haynes was a safe haven, and our dreams of Paris would surely come true.
It is hard to think of the restaurant as gone. Like you, I've been up there to 3 Rue Clausel a couple of times since it closed. Everything gone. Log facade, doors, curtains, Kon-Tiki hut. The world has moved on.
I often thought that he had that hut and those fake palms over the bar to remind him of his time soldiering in the Pacific at Guadalcanal.
I don't think anything could ever erase the first day I worked there. And Leroy told me to transfer 20 kilos of raw chitlins from a large metal vat in the walk-in fridge to several small containers by the stoves. What the hell was this stuff? Some kind of pig innards cloaked in congealed fat. It didn't give the impression of food. On the other hand, if James Baldwin, Louis Armstrong, and Memphis Slim, who always came by, could eat it, so could I. And I did. Not a whole lot of times, but I did acquire an appreciation for everything else Soul he had on the menu. The gizzards were even better than the chicken livers. The gumbo was incredible. The black beans and dirty rice enriched the already perfect fried chicken and barbecued ribs. Not to mention that those staff dinners, just before opening, saved my life.
The food was always good. We had a choice from the entire menu, and that meal kept me in shape. Most days I had a snack at lunch, I knew I had a hot meal waiting for me in the evening.
I remember Leroy coming out of the kitchen one night, taking a moment and looking at us all sitting around the dinner table eating his food and laughing about something ridiculous. He just shook his head. Then he said, "When I opened this restaurant, I fed black musicians. Now I'm feeding a bunch of white writers, artists, and dancers." At that time, he was almost the same age as we are now. He had seen and done most of what there was to see and do. I could see he was wondering what this change in his staff amounted to. White kids were clearly not what he had anticipated, but he was okay with it, even paternal, often grudgingly so. His eyes said it. We may not have been his first choice, but hell, we were what the deck had dealt him and he went with it.
We're two old geezers now, Greg, over 70. We thought we'd never reach this age. We're going to talk a little, and I don't care if this ever gets published.
Published? Are you kidding me? The word hardly has any meaning anymore. Back then, selling 100 copies of a book of my poems, 20 of which Leroy bought, was a major accomplishment. Now anyone with an idea and a sentiment can publish their work to thousands in seconds. And that's the way it should be. For me, just being alive and breathing, publishing my breath, is accomplishment enough. That's the end.
Wow, I really enjoyed that. Amazing. I'm looking forward to picking it up to read the rest of it.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank
And
you.
this is going to the Frankfurt Book Festival. That's very
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for being on the show, and I wish you the best of luck and more projects to come.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you for allowing us to rage in our own crazy way.
It was a
here
pleasure.
for you.
But I want to add one thing about you. I really, and I mentioned this to Greg a number of times. I said, she's amazing. I mean, she dedicates so much of her energy, time, and part of her life to books and reading and readers and writers. I mean, that's so rare.
I knew you shook your head, JF, but you know what I think struck us both by you, your podcast, and the other things that you do, and I heard you speak once, is that it resonated with us because when we were young, you just get out and do things. You just do things around things you love.
Yeah.
You hope they're successful, obviously, but the pleasure in doing it is great, and that really resonated with us both.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, it's a pleasure to be able to talk to other writers and artists. And it's a luxury for me. I mean, I grew up in a family that was impoverished, and this was not encouraged growing up. So in a way, I'm
sure
sort
it
of
wasn't.
a rebel. I was the rebel in the family.
And that's what it's about. That's how we feel, and that's what our book's about too, right? Yeah, you just
absolutely
and do it. So
congratulations. Thank you, and congratulations.
Thank you again.
Keep it up.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
For more upcoming episodes of the Artsy Raven about writing and publishing, visit us at jfgarrard.com/arpodcast. A reminder to Patreon subscribers that there is bonus content available for every episode on the Patreon website. If you enjoyed the show, you can show your appreciation by buying us some digital coffee. The Artsy Raven is produced by J.F. Garrard. The voice in the show's introduction is Chris Gorman, and music is by Tim Moore. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time, stay safe.